This episode is brought to you by the 2026 IT News State of Security Report and CoreView, the leading SaaS platform for Microsoft 365 tenant resilience. Stay tuned until the end to hear from Andrew McAllister, Vice President of APAC Sales at CoreView, as he discusses the security implications of Microsoft 365 becoming the operational heartbeat of today's enterprises, including the shared responsibility model for security and best practices for privilege management. Hello and welcome to the IT News podcast. Our guest this fortnight is David Stockdale, the Director of Cybersecurity at the University of Queensland and also Director of AUSCERT. David talks about building resilience in a university environment, including the contribution of the cyber domain to that effort and the lessons learned from cyber that could be applied in a broader university-wide context. He also examines the trend towards platformization of capabilities, which was a key theme of the State of Security report, and touches on the rise of Anthropic's Mythos and what it means for security teams.
I think it is that reality of not if, but when. This is something that I spoke at UQ in my role about 4 years ago. And the irony is we actually had a campaign to raise funds, not if, but when. But it wasn't to do with security. It was to do with trying to generate funds from our alum and philanthropic donations to try to get on and do some really great research. But of course, it was a good opportunity to then take that and say, yeah, but also think about this as the other way around. It's not about us doing good work, but it's also about how do we protect ourselves to do good work. So there was that beautiful meeting of that one phrase into two different meanings around UQ. And really, I think a lot of our effort has been put into a number of fronts. First of all, ensuring that everybody has an expectation that it will happen at some stage. And I think that's been made easier by some of the big breaches that many people have been affected. It's become almost the norm. But what we've tried to do is go, yes, but don't become complacent about it. We still have to do that. So we do a lot of outreach work into our whole community and talk about that. And that's part of our resilience of being prepared for a bad day type of thing. And not just in the IT or in the cyber perspective, but in the whole community perspective. Then we've been able to talk into the executive and the senior leadership of the university and start to say, okay, so when this happens, what's your response going to be? It's not pick up the phone and ask when is everything going to be back. That's not a suitable response. It's going to be how are you going to continue to do business if many of our key systems are out of operation for a period of time? The likelihood is on a big breach, it's going to be for quite a significant amount of time. It's going to be days or even weeks, potentially. Cyber resilience is my piece, but business resilience is your piece. And you're the ones who are going to be having to deal with that. So start to think about it sooner than later. What is your business continuity look like? That's a big outreach piece. Then in the background, we've started to have a lot more alignment between a cyber incident, an IT incident, and a general incident of any form in the university. Rather than just thinking about the cyber incident in terms of how do we deal with that, it's how do we deal with the components that are cyber, but how do we then tie that into the university's process and ensure the university has a really good process for dealing with an outage that's affecting IT, and more so actually a data breach these days. So we've pivoted people thinking about it's not just about your systems being unavailable, but it's actually about the breach of data that could have occurred. And that might be for many reasons. It might not even be a cyber attack type scenario. We've really started to do a lot of work around that. We talk about the cyber incident. We talk about having the whole operational incident within IT where that cyber sits for the University of Queensland. And then we talk about how does that fit into a critical incident. And when you get up to that critical incident level, that could be anything. It could be COVID. It could be a flood. So there is a consistency in how it's approached at the university level and how we communicate. And we have a really standard way of feeding into that process so that we don't get caught up in terms of having to do the comms at that level or having mixed messages coming out of the university. We want consistency. So our resilience is about how do we deal with the thing and then let the cyber people get on with the cyber element and the university people get on with the other elements of that, whether that be communications, whether that be legal, any of the other components that need to be dealt with in a big incident.
There's a lot of parallels in the language you're using between the university's approach and some of the requirements under the SOCI Act, like the CIRMP rules, for example. And I don't know whether that's playing a part in the mindset that the university is taking at all.
SOCI is a really interesting one for universities because to an extent, SOCI is around availability. And if you look at all the other industries, it's very much around availability. Universities have a slightly different perspective because it's not about day-to-day availability of a critical infrastructure service. It's got very much a different play in the university space, and there has been a lot of confusion around that. But we are very mindful about how does SOCI apply to us and making us focus on, well, what is critical, even if it's not critical necessarily on a daily basis to the state, to the country. It's what is critical for us as a business to be doing. So in that sense, we've leveraged the thinking around it a little bit towards our methodologies of dealing with being resilient. And then, of course, all our investments in detect and respond so that we can detect an incident as soon as possible, as opposed to when somebody rings up and says, oh, by the way, your systems are all off. It's like, oh, right, I didn't realise that type of thing. So we've put a lot of investment into that detect and respond piece as well.
So you're saying the whole university is aligned on its incident response frameworks, and cyber plays its role in that by meeting those standard ways of working and standard response to different scenarios that might come up in your domain, as anyone would do in their own respective domains.
That's correct. That consistency is very important because I think what you can't afford to be doing in the midst of a big incident is having to explain to the people who are dealing with other aspects about what their role is, because it's a cyber incident. It's like, no, your role is no different if it's a cyber incident or a cyclone coming or whatever it might be. You've got your role, it's well defined and you understand it. And then, of course, we're moving into that tabletop exercising our processes and ensuring that people really understand them and what their role is in this type of incident.
Was there much of a gap in terms of the way that your approach had been to cyber incident response versus some of the other parts of the university? So how big was the effort in terms of bridging and coming together on the one incident response plan and the one way of doing things?
From our perspective, it wasn't too big a gap. There was a top-down and a bottom-up approach to it. So the university wanted to really nail its processes around critical incident. And it was very happy to see where we were in terms of the cyber incident. And really aligning the two has not taken an awful lot of adjustment by either party. It's been quite a straightforward process. Now, it's never been tested in reality, and long may it be before it is. But we have gone through a couple of tabletop exercises over the last few years around cyber with the executive. So we have tested it, but we need to do more testing and exercising of that in the near future. But no, not a massive amount of effort was done because the university was starting at the top, working downwards, and we were starting at the bottom from the specific type of incident and working upwards. We didn't have that sort of horrible potential of building a tunnel from two different countries and ending up missing each other type of thing. We were aligned pretty well.
And was there anything from a cyber incident response perspective, or that the cyber organisation was able to contribute into that kind of broader process to say, look, if you were able to leverage this, we see success in leveraging this from a cyber perspective, but there may be broader application across different incident domains?
Yeah, I mean, I think the coordination function, where it's a really big incident about how do you bring in a third party who is doing this all of the time to do the coordination aspect, not necessarily to tell you how to do the cyber piece, not necessarily to tell you how to do any of the others, although they can offer services into that should you need it. That's been the one learning from the cyber perspective into the whole critical incident process, that we have these capabilities on tap where we need them from third parties who can bring in as much or as little as you need.
So you mentioned, I think, some system supports. You mentioned detection and response technologies as perhaps a system support from a specific cyber perspective. Are you able to talk about some of the investments that you've made around aiding this incident response mechanism from a cyber perspective? And I think also, just as a second part of that question, are there any systems investments that have been made that assist the university at a more macro level with its incident response and that governance and that coordination piece?
From the cyber perspective, yes, we are quite openly a Palo Alto Networks shop. We have a strong partnership with that particular company. Really, the background of that was that even though at the time when we first got into working with Palo Alto, it wasn't a particularly a platform approach, it emerged as a platform approach and became a very strong platform approach. So that means that we have that integration of lots of different data sets, whether it's our endpoint security, our XDR product, whether it's our firewalls, all of those coming into that central platform, and we're just in the process of taking that to the next offering. That means that we're quite rapid in our response, but The detection's one thing, the investigation is the other piece. And what we've been able to do because of this is we've been able to offer, obviously the investigation forensics piece is now a strong capability that we have, which serves the cyber incident thing well. And we get many, many cyber incidents of a very low level type of thing, whether it's accounts credentials that are being used and sold or whatever. In an organization of our size, it's not an unusual thing. So now we've got this sort of forensics capability that can do investigations. What we've actually found is how much of the university required that for different purposes as well. So whether it's from legal discovery or whether it might be from various different types of investigations, building this, the university has actually leveraged that service very effectively for many other different types of use cases. But we've never had to use that in other types of incident at the moment. And again, it's one of those things you build, you hope you've got a really great capability, you test it out, but you hope you never have to really use it in anger.
Maybe just dig in a little bit around the platform thinking side of things. This dovetails to something that came up consistently for the reports around standardization and consolidation. And obviously that's not exclusive to the security domain. We're seeing it across a lot of the IT function. And it's a cyclical thing in terms of going best of breed versus trying to get as much out of one vendor's ecosystem as possible. I think you mentioned there that you've been expanding the use of Palo Alto into different solutions and you're continuing with that journey, but maybe just if you can talk a little bit about the platform thinking mindset within cyber, and I don't know whether you want to put your AUSCERT hat on as well and just talk about it from a broader perspective outside of UQ as well, because I'm assuming it's being seen across end user organizations, not just exclusively UQ.
It is, and especially on the large organizations, I think that's very true. I think for us, the Palo Alto one was the fact that they covered the security domain quite effectively. Some of the other players would have SIEM, they'd have endpoint, they'd have some of the CASB type products, they'd have threat intelligence pieces, they'd have that, but they wouldn't necessarily have the hardware piece. Whereas Palo Alto Networks had the hardware piece as well as those other components. So it really was more of a pure play security piece. And you can see that the likes of Cisco, we were a Cisco shop for networking. You can see how Cisco are pivoting into that same type of model as well. So, it just gives you a little bit of confidence that this is the right way to go in. From an external perspective, we're seeing a lot more larger organizations definitely doing that. Security is a strange one because I don't think you find many areas where the whole landscape is, and I don't mean our technology landscape, I'm talking about the threat landscape, is changing so rapidly. And to some extent, the best you can ever achieve is trying to stay at the same level and wait for the thing to happen. And so I think people started to look for efficiencies, not to necessarily reduce their costs, but just to try to keep up with what was an almost exponential growth in activity on the threat side. I think the idea of consolidating into a platform is one of the ways you can do that. The other thing that we're seeing, obviously, is we're seeing acquisitions getting faster and faster. So companies, whether it's Cisco's, whether it's Palo Alto's, whether it's CrowdStrike's, all of those are acquiring pieces of the puzzle to try to bolster their complete services to make it more of an attractive platform. Again, I think your larger organizations are really pushed towards that. Choose your partner that you like, and hopefully that partner can deliver on nearly everything that you want.
The other aspect of platform plays we see increasingly is keeping a lot of those existing tooling, but trying to abstract away the data to like a security data lake or other layer where you can start to get a more centralized view, even if you're using a lot of different tools and hopefully you're using some sort of open telemetry or other way to get at that security data. I don't know whether that factors into UQ's thinking or whether you have a broader AUSCERT hat that you might want to look at around the data lake side of things, this whole kind of security data analysis.
From a UQ perspective, we are moving that, even though it's with their single vendor and it's their products, but that is their underlying architecture for many of their components. What we are seeing from an AUSCERT perspective is often even large organizations might have that whole platform piece, and it might be providing things like threat intelligence into their whole platform. What they're often wanting is a second source of that threat intelligence, either just to correlate it or to check that they're getting everything. And someone like AUSCERT, who is very cost effective at delivering that type of capability, is often seen as, this is a good little service to have. It can help us sort of just keep our vendors a little bit more honest as well.
Wondered if you had any thoughts around some of the AI threat landscape. I feel like with Mythos that came out from Anthropic, the conversation has really changed and it's end users who are sounding the alarm about, do we have access to it? It feels like something that might actually make this threat more real. So I don't know whether it's something that's factored into your kind of risk profiles or flags itself in your risk profiles.
There's obviously a lot of hype. Generative AI do some really great things, and as productivity tools, they're very good. And large language models applied to cybersecurity products can be very good for you trying to explore data and ask questions. And I think there's efficiencies come from the whole AI play. I think the Anthropic's Mythos offering is actually scary, and we have factored into our risk profile. And I'm really calling that out as being one of our number one threats at the moment, that once it gets into the wrong hands, and whether it's their model that gets out there, which it will do eventually, or whether it's somebody else building exactly this or very similar type of model, that ability to chain vulnerabilities together and to actually access into your environment is genuinely scary. And it changes the pace of things that are happening. I suppose the only other thing to think about is that how will we leverage it ourselves to do that discovery work so that we can then secure our services more. Inherently, organizations have process and procedures around doing change, whereas actors who are threatening you generally don't have an awful lot of processes and procedures that they've got to abide by. So there is an automatic disconnect between how responsive and agile you can be as well. And that's something I think we need to address, but still to keep safety at the heart of what we do when we do change. I think the final point is, I think it's going to challenge a lot of those products that vendors have in terms of their capabilities, and they're going to have to start to think very rapidly. I just think the pace has suddenly gone up an order of magnitude, potentially.
Microsoft 365 has become the operational backbone of modern business, but as organizations have embraced it, many have dramatically underestimated their own responsibility for securing it. We spoke with Andrew McAllister, CoreView Vice President of APAC Sales, about the common misconceptions that he encounters and what organizations need to do differently.
There are a few misconceptions around M365. Firstly, most IT business leaders think that Microsoft is looking after the security of the tenant. Secondly, they think that because they've bought expensive Microsoft licensing that they are fully covered from a security standpoint. Third, they are equating the resilience or the backup of their tenant only to the data, not to the settings and the control systems within the tenant. And finally, most IT admin teams are just assuming that the out-of-the-box privilege models from Microsoft are appropriate and fit for purpose.
The first of these misconceptions, that backing up data is enough, has real consequences. Andrew explains why data is only half the story.
We like to think about a Microsoft 365 tenant like a glass of water, where the water inside the glass is the data that you are looking to protect inside your organization, but the glass is the tenant and the configurations and the settings that house the data in the first place. So backing up your data is absolutely necessary. If you back up all of your mailboxes and your files and your documents, you're absolutely protecting your content. But the content doesn't recreate the environment that the organization relies on to work securely. So if you think about that glass of water, if you are backing up the water, that's great. But if the glass is cracked or if it's shattered because it's been misconfigured at the configuration level, think about all of the settings and the policies and the permissions and the role assignments, all of the security baselines and the governance controls, that's the glass. And you can't go ahead and pour the water back into a cracked or broken glass. So if you think about an incident maybe where a malicious actor has changed some conditional access policies and weakened some security settings, the organization may still have all of the data that they originally had in the tenant, but now the tenant is no longer trusted or it's in a working state anymore. So if you stop with data backup, you're only solving half of the resilience problem. We believe true resilience means being able to recover not just what the business owns, which is the data, but also how the business operates, which are the M365 settings.
As Andrew explains, configuration drift is only one side of the problem. The other is what happens when the wrong people have access to too much within an environment.
The potential ramifications are very far-reaching. So If you think about some of the common highly privileged accounts, everybody thinks about global administrators, for example, inside an M365 tenant. But also, I've mentioned SharePoint Online, but think about all of the admin privileges and profiles for the major M365 workloads. They are all highly privileged accounts, and they are gateways to not just the data. So, SharePoint, it's obvious. SharePoint is where you are typically storing a lot of the PII data for the organization. But that admin account not only has access to the data, it also has access to all of the control plane that protects that data, all of the settings there. So depending on the privilege, an attacker who gets their hands on one of these accounts could alter security settings. They can create or elevate new accounts. They can do things like switch off mailbox auditing so they can move around your network very quietly. They can change collaboration rules to allow for sensitive workloads and data to be shared more easily. And so it's really more than just compromising an account. It's actually compromising the admin integrity of the environment. So that's why privileged identity is such a critical issue in M365. It's that blast radius that's not just limited to, let's say, a single mailbox or one department. It can span multiple workloads and business processes very, very quickly.
So, with all of this in context, what does it look like when an organization stress tests its own ability to recover from exactly this kind of scenario?
There's a good example that comes to mind here. A large energy moderator company was running some tabletop exercises with their critical cloud platform. So what this typically looks like is running some exercises where they pose some scenarios. And one of the scenarios they had was, imagine if our M365 tenant was subject to a significant breach and was unavailable, right? And so the tabletop exercise works backwards from that point to figure out all of the mitigations and controls that they would need to get that environment back up to scratch in the worst case scenario, where the worst case scenario was that tenant would no longer be available anymore, right? Maybe it's been taken ransom, or maybe it's been so badly misconfigured that we can't unpick it, right? And what they found is when they ran that exercise manually, they tapped out at around 6 months. They had literally millions of individual settings within that environment, and they had administrative teams trying to rewind those very manually. They had spreadsheets where they were managing their configs and settings. They had some screenshots, and they were relying, unfortunately, really on the brain's trust of what was inside the head of a couple of key IT administrators in order to be able to recreate that recovery process.
That's the episode for this fortnight. Stay tuned for the next episode, and for all the latest headlines and happenings in Australian technology news, head over to itnews.com.au.